The mafia boss who wished his pregnant wife would disappear. Savannah Hale stood frozen outside her husband's office door, one hand pressed against the dark machbeer paneling, the other cradling the gentle curve of her belly where their child grew. Through the crack, Dante Moretti's voice cut through the silence like a blade, cold, merciless, final. She irritates me. I wish she would just disappear forever. The words weren't shouted in anger. They were delivered with the same calm detachment he used when ordering executions. In that moment, Savannah understood the truth. She wasn't his wife. She was his mistake. If you want to see how this story ends, stay until the very last word. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Savannah's journey reaches across the world. The mansion felt like a mausoleum at night. Savannah had noticed it before, of course, the way silence settled over the sprawling estate once the sun disappeared behind the skyline, how the marble floors seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it, how even her footsteps felt like an intrusion. But tonight, standing in the hallway outside Dante's private office with her bare feet cold against Italian tile, the oppressive quiet felt almost suffocating. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. That was what she would tell herself later, when the guilt tried to creep in during the small hours of morning. She had simply been restless, unable to sleep despite the pregnancy fatigue that made her limbs feel heavy and her thoughts sluggish. The baby had been active tonight, little flutters and kicks that both delighted and unnerved her, and she'd wandered downstairs thinking maybe warm milk or chamomile tea might help settle both of them. She had been passing Dante's office when she heard the voices. Her husband's office was supposed to be sacred territory. In the 6 months since their wedding, a lavish affair that had made the society pages and cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, Savannah had learned quickly that there were invisible boundaries in this house, lines she wasn't supposed to cross. Dante's office was the most inviolable of them all, but she had paused anyway, drawn by the sound of her husband's voice filtering through the heavy oak door. The situation is becoming problematic. That was Dante, his tone flat and businesslike. Savannah recognized it, the voice he used when discussing matters of business, which she had learned was code for the darker operations that funded their lifestyle. I need solutions, not excuses. Boss, with respect, the timeline you're asking for, the second voice belonged to Marcus, one of Dante's most trusted lieutenants. Savannah had met him exactly twice, both times at carefully orchestrated family dinners where she'd been expected to smile, look beautiful, and speak only when spoken to. I don't care about timelines. Dante's voice cut through Marcus's objection like a knife through silk. I care about results. The shipment needs to be clean, the routes need to be secure, and anyone who might become a liability needs to be handled, permanently. Savannah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the past 3 months. She should walk away. She knew she should walk away. Whatever Dante was discussing, it wasn't meant for her ears. But then Marcus said something that made her blood run cold. What about the personal situation, boss? Your domestic arrangement? There was a pause. Savannah could picture Dante in his leather chair, the one that looked like a throne, his dark eyes calculating and cold. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made her knees weak. My wife. The way he said it, not Savannah, not even she, made it clear he was discussing a problem, not a person. She's becoming a complication, Dante continued, and Savannah pressed herself closer to the door, her heart hammering so hard she was certain they would hear it through the walls. I thought marriage would provide useful cover, make me look stable and legitimate, and the pregnancy was supposed to help with that image, the devoted family man, building a dynasty. She seemed like a good choice, Marcus ventured carefully. Well-connected, educated, beautiful. Her father's reputation? Her father is dead. Dante's interruption was sharp. His connections died with him. All I got was a naive girl who actually believed the fairy tale I sold her. Savannah's free hand flew to her mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. The fairy tale. Their whirlwind courtship, his passionate proposals, the promises of protection and partnership, all of it had been calculated. A performance. The problem, Dante continued, and Savannah could hear the ice in every syllable, is that she's here, constantly. I can't have a private conversation in my own home without wondering if she's lurking somewhere, listening. She asks questions. She wants to be involved. She actually seems to think she's entitled to know about my life just because she's carrying my child. Most wives would expect that, boss. Most wives aren't married to me. The statement was delivered with such arrogant certainty that Savannah felt something crack inside her chest. I need space to operate, and she's taking up too much air in this house. Honestly, Marcus, she irritates me. Some days I wish she would just disappear forever. My life was simpler before I made the mistake of thinking domestic stability would serve my interests. The words hit Savannah like physical blows. Disappear forever. A mistake. What do you want to do about it? Marcus's question was careful, neutral, but Savannah heard the implication underneath. In Dante's world, problems that needed to disappear had a way of doing exactly that. Nothing dramatic, Dante said, and Savannah heard the sound of liquid pouring, probably the expensive scotch he favored. Not while she's pregnant. That would raise too many questions, create too much attention, but after the baby comes... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. After the baby comes, Marcus prompted. After the baby comes, things will change. I'll have my heir, the image I need, and Savannah will find herself with very limited options. I'm already having the lawyers draw up documents that will ensure custody stays with me, regardless of any complications in our marriage. She'll be isolated, controlled, and completely dependent on my goodwill. If she becomes too troublesome, there are facilities, private places where wealthy men send inconvenient wives. Depression, postpartum issues, mental instability, all very believable, especially with the right doctors signing the right paperwork. Savannah's vision blurred with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. She needed to hear this, all of it. And the child? Marcus asked. Will be raised properly without her influence if necessary. I have aunts, cousins, staff. The baby doesn't need its mother, just stability, education, and training to eventually take over what I've built. Savannah was a vessel, nothing more. Once she served that purpose, Dante didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Savannah stood in that hallway feeling the baby flutter inside her and understood with perfect, terrible clarity that she was not a wife. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't known she was playing, and the man she had married, the man whose child she carried, had been planning her destruction from the beginning. The conversation in the office shifted to other matters, details about shipments and territories that Savannah barely processed. She moved away from the door on silent feet, her whole body shaking, and made her way back upstairs to the master bedroom that suddenly felt like a beautiful prison. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the dark, one hand on her belly, and forced herself to think past the devastation, past the betrayal, past the sheer terror of realizing she was trapped in a house with a man who wished she would disappear. Because somewhere beneath the shock and fear, something else was stirring, something that felt like anger, like determination, like the stubborn survival instinct that had helped her weather her father's death 2 years ago, that had given her the strength to pick up the pieces of her shattered life and keep moving forward. Dante Moretti had made a critical error. He had underestimated her completely. He thought she was naive, and maybe she had been when they first met. He thought she was powerless, and maybe she appeared that way, standing in his shadow. He thought her father's death had left her with nothing, and that was where he was most dangerously wrong. Savannah's father, Thomas Hale, had been a financial consultant who specialized in creating legitimate business fronts for clients who operated in legal gray areas. He had never spoken explicitly about his work, but Savannah had been perceptive enough to understand that her family's comfortable lifestyle was built on her father's discretion and his genius for making questionable money look clean. What Dante didn't know, what no one knew, was that before her father died, he had called Savannah into his study one afternoon and given her a locked box. If anything happens to me, Thomas had said, looking older and more tired than she'd ever seen him, this box becomes important. Inside are documents, passwords, account information. I've built safeguards into every structure I've ever created, Savannah. Insurance policies. And I've tied them to you, not to my clients. If you ever need leverage, if you ever need protection, everything you need is in this box. She had been 23 years old, fresh out of graduate school, and she had taken the box with trembling hands, not fully understanding what he was telling her. I've worked with dangerous men, her father had continued quietly. Men who believe they're untouchable. But every empire has vulnerabilities, and I've built those vulnerabilities into the foundations. You're the only person who knows they exist. Promise me you'll keep this safe. Promise me you'll only use it if you have no other choice." Savannah had promised. And then, 6 months later, her father had died in a car accident that the police ruled mechanical failure, but that Savannah had never quite believed was truly accidental. She had kept the box hidden, moving it with her through 2 apartments before eventually bringing it to Dante's mansion, where it now sat in the back of her closet behind designer shoes and unworn evening gowns. Now, sitting in the darkness with her husband's cruel words echoing in her mind, Savannah made a decision. If Dante wanted her to disappear, she would disappear, but not the way he planned. The next morning, Savannah played her role perfectly. She came down to breakfast with her hair brushed smooth, wearing one of the elegant maternity dresses Dante preferred, pale blue, conservative, expensive. She smiled at the household staff, asked the chef to prepare her usual breakfast of fruit and toast, and settled at the dining table with a book. When Dante emerged from his office 45 minutes later, already dressed in one of his impeccable Italian suits, Savannah looked up with the same gentle, slightly distant expression she'd perfected over the past months. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning." Dante's response was distracted. He poured himself coffee from the silver service, checked his phone, and barely glanced in her direction. This was normal. This was their routine. Savannah watched him over the top of her book, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since they'd met. Dante Moretti was undeniably handsome. Dark hair, perfectly styled, sharp features, the kind of commanding presence that made people instinctively step aside when he entered a room. He was 38 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and feared by everyone who knew what he really was. And he had married her because she looked good in photographs. "I have appointments all day," Dante said, still focused on his phone. "Don't wait up tonight. I'll probably be late." "Of course." Savannah kept her voice mild, pleasant. "Will you be home for dinner tomorrow? The chef wanted to know. I'll let you know." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes passing over her without really seeing her. "You look tired. Maybe you should rest more. The pregnancy?" "I'm fine," Savannah interrupted gently. "The baby and I are both fine." Something flickered in Dante's expression. Irritation maybe, or impatience, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Good. I'll see you later." He left without kissing her goodbye, without asking how she felt, without any of the small gestures that normal husbands might make. Savannah listened to his footsteps receding, heard the front door open and close, heard the car start in the driveway. Then she set down her book, pushed away from the table, and went upstairs to begin her real work. The locked box was exactly where she'd hidden it, behind a row of shoes she never wore because Dante preferred her in heels despite her pregnancy. Savannah pulled it out, set it on the floor of her walk-in closet, and knelt in front of it with her father's key in her hand. Her hand shook as she unlocked it. Inside were folders, USB drives, and a sealed letter addressed to her in her father's handwriting. Savannah opened the letter first. "My dearest Savannah, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you found yourself in a position where you need the contents of this box. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I worked with the kind of men who make such precautions necessary. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. What you'll find here are the keys to several kingdoms. Over the years, I helped men like Dante Moretti build empires that look legitimate on the surface. I created business structures, charitable foundations, investment portfolios, all carefully constructed to launder money and provide legal cover for illegal operations. But I also built something else into every structure: insurance, legal clauses, ownership transfers, hidden beneficiaries. If you activate these safeguards, you can collapse or control the very systems that these men rely on to appear respectable. The documents in this box will show you how. The USB drives contain encrypted files with passwords, account numbers, and communication records. Everything you need to protect yourself is here. Use it wisely. Use it only if you must. And know that I loved you more than anything in this world. Your father, Savannah, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she carefully set it aside and began examining the folders. It took her 6 hours to go through everything. What she found was staggering. Her father had worked with Dante for years before Savannah had even met him, helping to establish the legitimate business fronts that made Dante look like a successful entrepreneur rather than a criminal. real estate holdings, import-export companies, charitable foundations, art galleries, all of them carefully structured to funnel dirty money through clean channels. And woven throughout all of it, like hidden threads in a tapestry, were legal mechanisms that gave control to Thomas Hale's designated beneficiary, Savannah. Ownership clauses that could be triggered under specific circumstances. Board positions that transferred automatically upon Thomas's death. Charitable foundations where Savannah, not Dante, was listed as the ultimate authority. None of it obvious, all of it buried in complex legal language that would require expert analysis to uncover. Her father had essentially made her the silent partner in Dante's legitimate empire, and Dante had no idea. Savannah spread the documents across her closet floor and began to formulate a plan. Over the next 3 weeks, Savannah transformed herself from a passive victim into something far more dangerous, a woman with purpose. She began by securing copies of everything Dante kept in his home office. This required careful planning, patience, and a willingness to take risks that would have terrified her a month ago. She waited until Dante was out of the house, then used lockpicks she'd ordered online to access his filing cabinets. She photographed documents, copied computer files onto encrypted drives, and meticulously documented everything she found. She discovered that Dante had indeed been having lawyers draft custody documents, papers that would give him sole control of their child, citing her mental instability as justification. She found communications between Dante and a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland discussing long-term care options for difficult family members. She found evidence of financial accounts in her name that she'd never opened, seeded with small amounts of money from questionable sources, groundwork, she realized, for a future accusation of criminal activity if he needed to discredit her. Every discovery made her more determined, more angry, more certain that she was fighting not just for herself but for her child. She also began carefully cataloging Dante's treatment of her. She saved text messages where he berated her for minor infractions. She recorded conversations where he spoke to her with contempt. She documented the nights he didn't come home, the events he attended without her despite her being his wife, the way he systematically isolated her from friends and family. "You don't need to work," he had told her early in their marriage, making it sound like a gift. "I'll take care of everything. Your old friends don't really understand our lifestyle," he'd said smoothly when she'd tried to maintain her previous social connections. "It's better if you focus on the family you're building here. This house has everything you need," he'd insisted when she'd mentioned feeling isolated. "Why would you need to go anywhere else?" Each statement, which had seemed controlling but perhaps protective at the time, now revealed itself as part of a larger pattern of isolation. He had been systematically cutting her off from any support system, any independent identity, any resources she might use to escape him. But he had miscalculated, because in isolating her he had also given her time to think, time to plan, time to prepare. Savannah also reached out carefully to old contacts from her father's world, lawyers, accountants, people who had known Thomas Hale and who remembered his daughter. She was cautious, meeting them in public places, using burner phones, never revealing too much at once. "My father left me some documents," she told Richard Chen, an attorney who had worked with Thomas for 15 years. "I need someone to review them, verify their legal standing, and help me understand my options. But this needs to be completely confidential." Richard, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who had always treated Savannah with grandfatherly kindness, studied her across the table at the coffee shop where they'd met. "Does this have anything to do with your husband?" "It has everything to do with my husband." Savannah met his gaze steadily. "And I need to know if I can trust you." Richard had known Thomas Hale well enough to understand what that friendship had cost. He had attended Thomas's funeral, had seen the questions in Savannah's eyes even then. He nodded slowly. "Your father was a good man caught in a bad world," Richard said quietly. "If he left you something that can get you out of that same world, I'll help you use it. Attorney-client privilege starts right now." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard reviewed everything. He confirmed that Savannah's father had indeed created a legal maze that gave her extraordinary power over Dante's legitimate business interests. He helped her understand the mechanisms for triggering those clauses, and he began preparing documents that would turn Savannah from a trapped wife into a woman who could bring Dante Moretti to his knees without ever breaking a single law. "This is brilliant," Richard said during one of their meetings, shaking his head in amazement. "Your father didn't just create insurance. He created a nuclear option. If you activate these clauses, Dante loses control of approximately 60% of his legitimate business holdings. The charitable foundation, the art gallery, the real estate trust, all of it transfers to you. And because it's all legal, there's nothing he can do to stop it." "Will it hold up in court?" Savannah asked. "Better than that? It's ironclad. Your father had these documents reviewed by 3 different law firms, none of whom knew about the others. Every possible challenge has been anticipated and blocked. The only way Dante could fight this is by admitting that these businesses were never legitimate in the first place, which would expose him to criminal prosecution." Savannah felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "So I can actually do this. I can get away from him and protect my baby." "Ma, you can do more than that," Richard said seriously. "You can make sure he can never do this to anyone else. The foundation alone represents millions in charitable donations every year, donations that make Dante look like a philanthropist while actually laundering his money. If you take control of that foundation and restructure it into something genuine, something that actually helps people, you don't just escape him. You turn his own weapon against him." That night, Savannah lay in bed next to her husband, maintaining the appearance of normalcy even as she planned his downfall, and allowed herself to imagine a future beyond this mansion, beyond this prison dressed as luxury. She imagined a small house somewhere quiet, with a garden where her daughter could play safely. She imagined working again, using her education and her father's legacy to help other women recognize the signs of control and coercion before it was too late. She imagined a life where she didn't flinch at footsteps, didn't measure every word, didn't live in constant fear of disappearing. It wasn't revenge she wanted, she realized. It was freedom and justice, and the absolute certainty that her daughter would never know what it felt like to be powerless. The final catalyst came 2 months later, when Savannah was 7 months pregnant. She had been feeling unwell all day, nothing serious, just the normal discomforts of late pregnancy amplified by stress. Around 8 in the evening, she experienced a sharp pain that made her gasp and grab the edge of the kitchen counter. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who had been kind to Savannah in small, quiet ways, immediately noticed. Mrs. Moretti, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Savannah said automatically, but another wave of pain made her wince. "Maybe I should sit down." "I'm calling Mr. Moretti," Mrs. Chen said firmly, already pulling out her phone. "No, please, it's probably nothing." But the housekeeper was already dialing. Savannah could hear Dante's voice through the phone, irritated and impatient. Mrs. Chen explained the situation quickly, then listened, her expression darkening. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "I understand." She hung up and looked at Savannah with poorly disguised anger. "He says if you're that concerned, call your doctor. He's in a meeting and can't be disturbed." The pain subsided, and Savannah realized it was probably just Braxton Hicks' contractions. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. But the message was clear. Even if she had been in genuine medical distress, Dante couldn't be bothered to come home. That night, after the doctor had confirmed via phone that everything was fine and she just needed to rest, Savannah made her final decision. She had gathered enough evidence. She had prepared the legal documents. She had secured a place to go, a small apartment in another state, rented under a name Dante would never connect to her. She had opened bank accounts he didn't know about and transferred money from sources her father had left her, money that had nothing to do with Dante Moretti. All that remained was choosing the moment. She decided it would be soon, before the baby came, before Dante could execute whatever plan he had for after, before she became even more vulnerable. Savannah sat at her window that night, looking out over the manicured grounds of Dante's estate, and felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, would probably always be there. But it was joined now by determination, by purpose, by the unshakable knowledge that she was done being invisible. Dante Moretti thought he had married a naive girl who would disappear when he decided she was inconvenient. He was about to discover he had actually married Thomas Hale's daughter, a woman who inherited not just her father's secrets, but his spine. And unlike Dante, Savannah Hale understood that real power didn't come from violence or intimidation. It came from being underestimated by your enemies right up until the moment you destroyed them. The baby kicked inside her, strong and sure, and Savannah placed her hand over the movement. "I promise you," she whispered to her unborn daughter, "you will never live in a world where someone else controls whether you exist. I promise you that much." In his office downstairs, Dante worked late into the night, completely unaware that the woman he wished would disappear was planning to do exactly that. But not the way he expected. Not even close. 3 days after the false alarm that revealed just how little Dante cared about her well-being, Savannah sat across from Richard Chen in a private conference room at his law firm. Between them lay the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, documents that would either free her or destroy her, depending on how carefully they executed the next steps. "Once you trigger these clauses," Richard said, his finger tracing a line through the contract language, "there's no going back. Dante will know immediately that you're not the passive wife he thought you were. You need to be gone before he realizes what's happened." "I understand." Savannah's voice was steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "How long will I have?" "The documents will be delivered to his office at 9 a.m. Assuming he reads them immediately and gets his lawyers involved, you'll have maybe 4 hours before he fully comprehends the scope of what you've done. 6 hours at most." Richard leaned back, studying her with concern. "Savannah, once you do this, Dante Moretti will use every resource at his disposal to find you. Are you certain about the safeguards?" "The apartment is rented under a shell company. I have new identification documents. My phone and laptop will be destroyed before I leave. I've memorized the account numbers and passwords. Nothing is written down that could be traced." She placed her hand on her swollen belly. "And I have something Dante doesn't expect." "Which is?" "His complete underestimation of me." Savannah met Richard's eyes. "He thinks I'm fragile, naive, easily controlled, that arrogance is my advantage." Richard nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud of you, and probably horrified that you needed to use what he left you." "My father knew exactly what kind of men he worked with," Savannah said quietly. "That's why he built these safeguards in the first place. He knew that one day someone would need them." She left the law firm an hour later with copies of every document secured in an encrypted cloud storage that only she could access. The originals would remain with Richard, locked in a safe that would only open with her biometric signature and a code that changed daily. Back at the mansion, Savannah moved through her evening routine with practiced calm. She had dinner prepared by the chef, picked at her food while pretending to read, and retired early to the bedroom with complaints of fatigue. Dante, who had come home for exactly 45 minutes before leaving again for what he called business, barely acknowledged her departure. "Get some rest," he said absently, his attention on his phone. "You look exhausted." "I will, thank you." Savannah paused at the doorway, looking back at the man she had married. In the soft lighting of the living room, he looked almost like the person she had thought she was marrying, handsome, powerful, confident. But she knew better now. She saw the coldness in his eyes, the dismissive set of his shoulders, the complete absence of concern for her beyond what she represented to his image. "Dante?" she said softly. He glanced up, impatient. "What?" For a moment, Savannah almost told him everything, almost laid out exactly what she knew, what she had discovered, what she was about to do. The urge to see his face when he realized he'd been outmaneuvered was almost overwhelming. But that would be foolish, dangerous. And Savannah had learned over the past months that survival required swallowing your pride and playing the long game. "Nothing," she said instead. "Good night?" He had already looked back down at his phone. "Night?" Upstairs, Savannah began the careful process of preparation. She couldn't pack bags. That would be too obvious if anyone saw. Instead, she had been slowly moving items to the apartment over the past 3 weeks. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, photographs of her parents. The essentials were already there, waiting. What remained in the mansion were the clothes Dante had bought her, the jewelry he'd given her as gifts that felt more like chains, the designer accessories that had never suited her anyway. She would leave it all behind without a second thought. The only things she took that final night were her father's locked box, now empty but precious for what it had contained, and a single photograph of her mother that sat on her nightstand. Everything else was replaceable or unwanted. She also prepared one final item, a sealed box that would be left on Dante's desk. Inside was a letter explaining exactly what she had done and why, copies of the legal documents showing the transfer of control, evidence of his planned custody manipulation, recordings of his cruel comments about wishing she would disappear, medical records showing the stress she'd endured during her pregnancy, statements from staff members who had witnessed his neglect and contempt, obtained quietly over weeks of careful conversation and the promise of protection. But most importantly, the box contained the triggered clauses from her father's original contracts, now activated and irrevocable. Savannah had debated whether to include a personal message, some final words that would make him understand the depth of his miscalculation. In the end, she kept it simple. The letter read, "You wished I would disappear. Consider your wish granted. But unlike your usual problems, I'm disappearing on my terms, not yours. Everything you're about to lose, you lost the moment you decided I was disposable." S. She sealed the box and placed it carefully in her bag. Tomorrow morning, before she left, she would leave it in the center of his desk where he couldn't miss it. That night, Savannah lay in bed and waited for Dante to come home. He arrived past midnight, moving through the bedroom with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He undressed in the dark, slipped into bed without touching her, and was asleep within minutes. Savannah listened to his breathing and felt nothing. No love, no regret, no second thoughts. Just a cold, clear determination to be gone before he woke. At 4 a.m., she rose silently and dressed in comfortable clothes. Jeans, a soft sweater, flat shoes suitable for someone 7 months pregnant and planning to disappear. She moved through this dark mansion like a ghost, collecting the few remaining items she needed. In Dante's office, she placed the sealed box in the center of his immaculate desk. The sight of it sitting there, innocuous and devastating, gave her a fierce satisfaction. By 4:30, she was in her car, not the Mercedes Dante had bought her, but the old Honda she'd kept from before the marriage, the one he'd dismissed as beneath her station and relegated to the far corner of the garage. She had kept it registered and maintained, telling Dante it had sentimental value. Really, she had kept it because it was hers, not his gift, and therefore not his to control. The drive to the apartment took 90 minutes. Savannah watched the sunrise through her windshield, her hand steady on the wheel, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The apartment was small, barely 800 square feet, in a quiet neighborhood that was neither wealthy nor poor. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business, where a pregnant woman living alone wouldn't attract unusual attention. Inside, Savannah found everything exactly as she'd left it during her last visit. The furniture was basic but comfortable.